Hey there, welcome back to the channel. We're on about part, 5 or so of tearing down this Dana 44, which is part, I don't even know what, of doing a frame up resto. When you get to this kind of a point in a restoration, don't think about how many steps you have to go, because there's a crap ton left to do. Just think about the step ahead, the one that you're working on right now. Just keep thinking of what I'm working on right now, and eventually you'll get to the end. At least that's what I'm telling myself at this point. At any rate, I'm working on this Dana 44. I pulled the carrier out. I pulled the pinion out. I took the housing actually in to have blasted and powder coated. I've got the knuckles in getting blasted, some of those types of things. When I took it apart, this bearing is a piece of crap. I mean, I remember it making a little bit of noise, but not like I would have expected. Though this is the front and I didn't drive a whole lot in four-wheel drive, so who knows. At any rate, this thing has to come apart. Taking these things apart is, generally speaking, not a real trivial task unless you've got the right tools for it. If I rotate this around, let's see if we can get down in here. There's a little indentation here and on the other side. Let me zoom in for you. Oh, there we go. Right here, there's another one on the other side. That allows a two-jaw gear puller to reach in and grab onto it. Another thing to notice, I'm going to lift this up here. There's a couple of shims underneath the bearing. There's a couple more there. Those shims are important. I'll draw attention to them when we take them off. But when we take these bearings off, make sure that those shims, the bolt side, the shims that are on this side, need to go back here, and the same thing for the other side. It will help you to have to not reset up everything. If you're not taking the ring gear off the carrier, which I'm not, you should be able to just push everything back together with new bearings and the existing shims. Obviously, you should probably check it when you do that. I will check that when we get this reassembled, and I'll show you how to do that. But usually, when you put it all back together, if you haven't taken the ring gear out, you haven't changed your pinion, if you keep all of the shims where they were when you pulled it apart, it'll go back together. Same thing here. These shims on the pinion, I kept those where they were, and they'll go back there when it goes back together. So as I was saying, there are a couple of indentations here and on the other side for a two-jaw gear puller. If you're going to use a two-jaw puller to pull this, you also need something that sits down in here, usually if it's got a step, so a step that goes down into the bore, and then a shoulder that is smaller around than the inside of the bearing, but bigger than, the hole, that you can push against and pulls it up. The problem with using one of those is when you pull here, it actually deforms this cage and it ruins the bearing. In this case, because this bearing's already crap, I don't care. But if you were doing something where you were maybe changing these shims out because you were resetting up a rear end and you have to put it on, make it a measurement and go, oh, I got to move it some, so I need to put a different shim in. You'd like to be able to pull that bearing off without destroying it. Having to buy a new bearing for every time you push it on is probably not the best way to go. So there is a bearing puller. There are a couple of styles for pulling these that don't destroy the bearing. I've got one right here in this box. Let's open it up and we'll take a look and see how it works. I've not used one of these before, but Dr. Torque recommended it to me, and I trust his opinion on, well, some things. So we'll take this apart and see what we've got. All right, now let's use it to pull the bearing off of this carrier. The first thing we want to do is we want to figure out which clamshell fits. And if you look at these, you can see this has a small side and a large side. So this dimension and this are different. So we actually have 3 sets of clamshells, so we've got 6 different sizes we can test. You want one that closes underneath the bearing and comes completely together, but with this little, basically the smallest you can use, but big enough to hold it. That's too small. That's pretty big. The small on the black is smaller than the large on the yellow. And that's pretty good. You want to use a race that matches the bearing. So I'm going to drop that down on. And then this tool, we want to find one that doesn't fit real well. If I flip it over, this fits nicely. This outside of this shaft will go inside the bore of that bearing. So it'll allow that bearing to slip up over it. Next, we're going to take the puller and drop it down on. And now we want this clamshell to fit, so I'm going to move this down a little bit, get this clamshell to fit nice and tight inside of there. Still a little too tight. There we go. I'm going to tighten this one down against it. We take this lock ring. It goes over the clamshell. Note the split is here. We want this bolt off to the side. Doesn't need to be super tight. It's just to prevent it from falling down. Just give you a little bit of friction. So now we have everything tightened down. Now we're going to tighten this down until this comes in contact with that, I guess alignment post, whatever you want to call it in the middle there. That center shaft anyway. Because this is where all the friction is, I'm going to lubricate it one more time. Just WD-40. And now I'll get the impact and drive it. And it should just pull this bearing right up. I didn't think about it when I ordered it. The hex on that drive screw is really big. Fortunately, I had this front wheel drive hub socket that actually fits. So it's a 36 millimeter. So if you're going to order one, make sure you order the socket too. It's kind of an expensive tool, but without it, that sure would have been a lot of cussing. Now I'll disassemble. Remember, there are shims in here we do not want to misplace. There's one of them. There's the other. I'm going to keep them not just in place, but in order and facing the correct direction. So these face the bearing. So I'm going to stack them with the bearing in a box. And because this one came off of the bolt side, to help me remember that, I'm going to put a bolt in the middle of the bearing in the box. Before I put it away, I'm going to record the manufacturer and part number of this so I can cross-reference when I order new ones, both for the bearing and the race. Then I'll put it into a box, put the shims on as they were. This is the bolt side. That reminds me that it's the bolt side. So now I'll put the other bearing in over here without a bolt. Now we just need to flip it over, do the other side. I'm fairly certain this puller can also do this pinion bearing. The one thing that's different here is I don't have the race for this. I don't know if it really matters, but the race is still in the housing, and the housing is not here. So we're going to pull it without ordering all new bearings anyway. So if it ruins this bearing, I don't really care. It's a different size clamshell here. This time the yellow one closes completely. And we don't need this shaft, because the pinion shaft itself is that piece. So put that on so it goes all the way down against the bearing here. Clamshell. Then the collar. Let's give this a try. And again, we can use this to cross-reference when we order. So there we have it. That's how you get the bearings off the carrier and the pinion. This tool, there are definitely more expensive ones. I was surprised that this, being one of the cheapest ones I could find, is still pretty darn good quality. I would recommend it. Next, I'll order a rebuild kit that has new bearings and seals and everything, and we can put that back into the case once we get it back from powder coat. That's all there is for today. Thanks for watching.